Reconvene the regular meeting of the Board of Lane County Commissioners for Tuesday, June 11th. Oops, I'm on the wrong page. We are here with an item from our Public Works Department. This is a work session with our Planning Director, Amber Bell, Lindsay Eichner, our Assistant Planning Director. And this is a work session on Lane County planning and zoning, and overview of processes and information to share from staff. And we have allotted 75 minutes total for this item. And then we do have a 3 p.m. time certain. So we'll need to stay on task here. So we have a little time for assignments and announcements before our 3 o'clock. I'll turn it over to staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioners. So I'm Amber Bell. I'm the Planning Director with Public Works Department's Land Management Division Planning Program, and with me is Lindsay Eichner, our Assistant Planning Director. So apologies, I'll go ahead and share our screen. We have a PowerPoint that I will share momentarily. Okay, apologies for that. So Lindsay and I supervise the planning program together. We wear many hats. I thought I'd just give a really quick summary of what we both do. So I oversee and manage the planning program, both current planning and long-range planning. And Lindsay is our supervisor for our current planning program, our Firewise program. She also provides support to some regional and urban planning long-range projects, and is currently managing a few special projects as well, such as for the Blue River Community Plan. So this is a work session that in some ways is a continuation of the work session that we held with the board last March 15th. And it also is a follow-up on some discussions that we had with some commissioners about diving into some specific topics. So we hope it's helpful today. We'll be focusing on Lane County planning and zoning topics, and more specifically, we'll go over statewide planning goals, Oregon administrative rule, Oregon revised statute, rural comprehensive plan policies, lane code, and lane manual, type 4 proposals and procedures, and the role of the planning commission, Lane County common zones, including marginal lands, what is involved with the planner on duty visit, and then upcoming projects. And before I dive in, I want to just mention that Lindsay and I will both be presenting, and we thought in between our presentations, we can pause and talk about any questions that you might have, and then also talk about any questions at the end that you may have. So the key components of the statewide planning program, this is probably a little bit of a recap from last March, are the statewide planning goals, the Oregon revised statute, Oregon administrative rules, that's a rule that interprets or prescribes all our policy of the state agency, and then a local comprehensive plan, which can be the map or the text, along with the zoning map and the text that goes along with that. And so some more specific information about those components. First of all, so statewide planning goals. So there are 19 goals that the state has in place that were adopted by the Land Conservation and Development Commission. All of them apply in Lane County, which makes our planning program one of the most rigorous in the state. We have greenway and coastal goals in addition to the first 15 statewide planning goals. The goals express state policies on land use and related topics. Most goals are accompanied by guidelines. They are mandatory, but then there are specific requirements that are further implemented in the Oregon revised statute and Oregon administrative rule. Local comprehensive plan must be adopted that's consistent with the goals that's required by state law, and then that's reviewed and acknowledged or approved by Land Conservation and Development Commission. So for Lane County, that was done in 1984 for our rural comprehensive plan. And then there's some criteria that apply when there's a plan amendment or zone change that require a finding of consistency with the statewide planning goals. And then these are the main state laws that apply to our planning program, the ones that we work with a lot. So that's Oregon Revised Statute Chapter 215, which is the county land use planning and resource lands chapter. And that mainly addresses what uses are allowed in the farm zones and the resource zones. There's tiered uses. Sub 1 use is an allowed use that counties can't further regulate per case law, and a sub 2 use that counties can choose to regulate or adopt further regulations for. There's also standards that address marginal lands counties. Lake County is one of 2 marginal lands counties. Washington is the other, and Lindsay will dive into that a little bit more. So this chapter addresses some of that, and then it also addresses some requirements around permit process and timelines. And I'm just providing a really high level summary of these statutes. Oregon Chapter 195 is local government planning coordination. Just to give some examples of what that addresses requirements for special districts, Measure 37, 49 claims, just compensation claims, population forecasts. There's also some language in there directing LCDC to adopt rules for state and local park master planning and allowable uses in parks. ORIS Chapter 197, that's comprehensive land use planning. That includes a number of procedural requirements, definition of what a land use decision is or is not. It includes requirements for adopting comprehensive plans. There are standards in there regarding the need for clear and objective standards for housing in certain areas and UGBs, and then the language that House Bill 3197 added, and language in there regarding manufactured housing. And then ORIS Chapter 92, that's for subdivision and partitions. A lot of that applies to surveying requirements, plotting requirements that the surveyor's office would work with. But then also in there are requirements for planning review, for property line adjustments, as well as for what is a lawfully established unit of land. In other words, a legal lot, and for a process that we call validation of unit of land. If it's not a legal lot, there's a process to apply to plat it. And then Oregon administrative rules. So that 660 is mainly what we look at related to land use. And so the legislature delegated Land Conservation Development Commission as a broad policymaking and regulatory authority under ORS Chapter 187. That includes responsibility for adopting and implementing statewide planning goals. And LCDC is delegated authority to adopt administrative rules that can be more restrictive in some cases. And these are just some examples of the different, more specific rules that we look at there. So they have language for forest lands and farmlands and what uses are allowed and specific criteria. We went through a code modernization effort several years back to update our farm and forest codes to align with the state's model code. So that's really implementing those 2 ag lands and forest lands rules sections. There's language that talks about the criteria for full exception for public facilities planning. For instance, where you can have a sewer line, mostly in unincorporated communities or in UGBs, but there's some specific goal exception language if you're looking beyond the UGB. There's specific standards for how you designate unincorporated communities and what uses are allowed and the size of those uses are allowed. And so just to give some examples there. And then in Lane County, so we have city plans that are co-adopted. As you all know, there was just a meeting with City of Springfield last night to look at the adoption of William Lane's comprehensive plan. We also have in Lane County the Eugene Springfield Metropolitan Area Plan, and then the Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan. And those include plan designations and policies. And usually the policies don't apply directly as development standards, But unless it is a specific enough development standard that was some sort of programmatic requirement that wasn't integrated into the code. So like an example of that is the Goal 5, Policy 11 density standard that came up. So that's lives in the rural comprehensive plan, but acts as a development standard. And then lane code, of course. So this is a lot of what we work with in current planning on a day-to-day basis. And what we look at is first, what's the mapping on the zoning, and that tells us what zoning code to look at. And then we look at what codes or applications are dictated by the code. In current planning, our main job is to implement the standards that have been already adopted and comply with lane code and state law. And so here's a list of the main codes that we work with. So Lane Code Chapter 10, that includes zoning and some procedural requirements. That applies in the urban growth boundaries of the county. The exception to this is Eugene and Springfield. We have intergovernmental agreements with Eugene and Springfield. And so they they administer their permitting and zoning regulations, and we work with the cities to either adopt or co-adopt those standards outside of city limits. Lane Code Chapter 12 is the comprehensive plan chapter, and that includes the process for amending the rural comprehensive plan or metro plan. Lane Code Chapter 16, that includes zoning and development code and some specific other processes, and that applies in the rural comprehensive plan area. So that includes zoning, combining zones, procedures for zone changes, processes to apply for telecommunication tower co-location, as well as our recreational marijuana time, place, and manner regulations, just to name a few things. And then Chapter 13 is where our standards live and processes live for land divisions. And that also includes property line adjustments, legal lot verifications, and validation of unit of land. And then Chapter 14 is our application review and appeal procedures. And we'll be coming before the board in June 26th to talk about options for elevating appeals to the board. So that would be taking a look at Chapter 14 is where our appeal procedures live. And then just one more example is our Chapter 15 road standards. That includes public road standards as well. In our planning work, we look at the road setbacks and private road standards in Chapter 15. So there's reference between Chapter 15 and 16, and then there's also some variant standards as well. And so I did want to touch on lane manual briefly here as well. Apologies. So lane manual documents the board's policies. In some cases, other sections of lane code have since been adopted, or state law has been enrolled that applies. But there are some sections of lane code and lane manual that apply specific standards. So there's sections, and I'll just give a few examples, where lane code points to lane manual as a development standard. So one of those is for our beaches and dunes hazards checklist and site investigation report. There are specific additional site and development requirements that apply for sand stabilization. There's a preliminary investigation required, and the hazard checklist guidelines are specified in lane manual. And then the contents of what's called a site investigation report, if it's a second level review, if there are hazards or impacts to be found on site when you're looking at a beaches and dunes area, then lane manual specifies what should be in that next level review to ensure safety for the proposal. And then there's also language in lane manual that talks about what's designated as a water quantity or quality groundwater limited area. And that applies largely at the time of land division or plan amendment. And lane manual also includes requirements for wells. And again, there's a link from Chapter 13 when you're looking at land division to the well requirements, and lane manual talks about the amount of water that needs to be available. And if that threshold is not met, then some storage requirements options. So last March, I went over type 1 through type 4 procedures. I'm happy to answer any questions about the type 1 through 3 procedures, but right now I was planning to talk about type 4. I'm happy to answer any other questions about the other procedures. So regarding type 4 procedures, so these can be things like code amendments, amendments to the Metro Plan or City Comprehensive Plan. That could require adoption or co-adoption depending on the jurisdiction and the intergovernmental agreements that are in place. A comprehensive plan amendment can be a text, plan map, or amendment to plan components, the findings or the documents that are adopted, or a refinement plan that's adopted with a comprehensive plan. They can include goal exceptions, which a goal exception is a decision to exclude certain land from statewide planning goals. There's criteria, and it's pretty rigorous, that's set out in Oregon Administrative Rule. It's required to be a plan amendment, and they include different kinds of goal exceptions with different criteria, different routes that can be applied for, such as the reasons exception, developed or irrevocably committed. There's some specific criteria for sewer to be extended to rural lands or urban transportation. And plan amendments can either be privately initiated or can be initiated by a local government. And they can be legislative or quasi-judicial. And the main distinction there is that generally code amendments, plan amendments affect a large amount of properties of broad area. Those are generally legislative, and quasi-judicial applications are usually affecting a specific property or smaller number of subset of properties. And then all of these examples fall within the purview of what the Planning Commission reviews. So just wanted to touch a little bit on the Planning Commission's role. And there's some specific requirements that applies to the formation and the duties of the Planning Commission. And those come from Oregon Revised Statute, Lane Manual, the APM here in Lane County, and then the Lane County Planning Commission has adopted bylaws. The Planning Commission is responsible for administering Goal 1. They're the advisory committee per the APM on planning matters, and they're also Goal 1 Public Involvement Committee. And then per Lane Manual and the bylaws, they recommend to the board adoption of a comprehensive plan or any part or element thereof, or any amendment to such plan or part or element thereof. They recommended the board ordinances intended to carry out the purposes, principles, and proposals expressed in the comprehensive plan. They sometimes work on special board referrals, and again, they're responsible for public involvement in all aspects of comprehensive planning. So there's some specific duties that are listed in their bylaws, and those are kind of the main ones. And at this point, I will pause. I'm going to hand the mouse to Lindsay, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm going to telegraph a later question, just for you to think about a very short description of how our Oregon Revised Statutes changed, ORS, how our OARs changed, that is who is the authority that changes each of these, how is Lane Code changed, and how is Lane Manual changed. We all know the answers, but if we can just have a single sentence on how each one of those, who is the authority, and what is the process for changing any of those.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, brilliant.
By the way, I'm sorry, that was the best document I've ever seen on describing land use, so beautiful done. Pardon my interruption.
So I just wanted to show a map and show all the cities. I'm sure you're all aware of all the cities in the county, but there are 12 incorporated cities. There are 35 unincorporated communities that Lane County has jurisdiction over. And so an unincorporated community is subject to the state's unincorporated communities rule, which is in OAR 660.022.
Excuse me, you should be able to minimize the little tiles on the right. So, because I think the screen share is what the public is seeing in our meetings, and then they'll be able to see everything on Metro. Yeah, great. And then just drag that. Beautiful. Thank you.
There we go. Okay. So a rural unincorporated community consists primarily of dwellings of mainly rural residential lands, but it also must have at least 2 other land uses to qualify as a community. So typically it's commercial, industrial, or a public use. A lot of times it'll be a school or a community store or post office, things of that nature. So when we were adopting a rural comprehensive plan, we were looking for those 3 elements in an area for them to qualify as an unincorporated community.
Pardon me, Lindsay,
Yes.
I apologize. In the map on UGB's, the previous map of this, I'm looking at online. Mine doesn't go as far as Blue River. And notice that one. So is that because Blue River doesn't have an UGB or?
Blue River is actually an unincorporated community.
So it's that, so the next map still doesn't show Blue River.
So
It doesn't name Blue
Mount
River.
Mackenzie Bridge,
Yeah.
but it is
Thank you.
close there.
Thank you.
And so I'm sorry, can you say that again? Because that was to qualify as a unincorporated community as opposed to just some land. It has to have population and say those criteria
It's not
again.
necessarily specific population, but it's typically mostly residential uses, but you have to have 2 other types of uses, whether it's residential, commercial, or public.
Uses as in zoning or actual, there have to be those things
When we
in.
were doing the review, we were looking at existing uses on properties. And that's when, at the same time, we were also looking at what to zone the properties. Some of them may have had zoning already, but in 84, when we were doing that, that's the analysis that we were doing.
That was the next question. In 84 is when that was.
Yes.
Got it. Commissioner Senegal.
And you said 2 other or 2 total?
2 other besides
besides
residential.
Thank you.
That's our zoning map. And you can see the dark green is F1 land. So the majority of the county is, the majority is zoned non-impacted forest land. So I just thought I'd share that map as well. Again, it's hard when you're at the whole county level, it's so large, it's hard to see details, but it paints the picture of how and where kind of the development is in the county. So this is a list of common zones on the left, and on the right, it's a screenshot from our GIS mapping software that we utilize and that we have available to the public. And that's the majority of the zones that we have in rural areas. So there's quite a few, but the majority of the land is under that common zones list on the left, which I will go through very quickly, except I'm going to spend more time on the marginal lands, because we are unique with marginal lands in Lane County. So with the forest zones, we have the F1 zone, which is non-impacted, and the F2 zone, which is considered impacted forest land. The main purpose of both zones is to protect forest land for commercial forest use, for grazing and rangeland. Our code that we have adopted, as Amber was saying, we recently, a few years ago, went through a code update, is as close to a state law as we are able to get. And the idea to keep our code as similar to state law and mirror it as much as we can is to reduce the chance of misinterpreting the law or the code language, so we just try to keep it as close as we can. We've gone down the avenue of trying to clarify some of those code requirements and then find out that we clarified them incorrectly, things like that. So we try to keep it as close to state law as possible. We have replacement dwellings, can be either type 1 or type 2 reviews. New dwellings on vacant F1 land are prohibited. In the F2 zones, we have options for dwellings, and as you know, there's been some discussion on vacant habitat related to those that we've presented on. All structures in both of these zones all new structures, I should say, must comply with fire siting standards, which include fuel breaks, driveway standards, and setbacks from slopes. And all of that's to try to reduce the spread of wildfire. And the next zone is exclusive farm use zone. Very similar to the forest zones with our code regulations. The majority of the code that we have is straight out of state law, and actually the codes that we did adopt were created by DLCD. They were model codes. So we tried to adopt as similar to state law as we could. The general purpose of the exclusive farm use zone is to protect high value farmland as well as preserving large blocks of open land for farming opportunities. And marginal lands. Marginal land is intended to be a subset of resource zones.
That's a good question back on the EFU. And this is one of those, right? Your division suffers from this more than any other, is the sort of definition of a single word can trigger a whole series of things. And I also, before I ask my question, just want to note, when you said like you try to keep things as aligned with the state law to avoid, and sometimes you do your best and then you learn it was a little off to one side and bring it back into better alignment. And I just, more for the benefit of the public and to remind us, I think often changing definitions or realignments like that can be interpreted as if people are sort of using personal discretion to make a ruling about something, when it's really important to just zoom out and remember, when you do those things or make those decisions, you're trying to do it with the long game in mind. And it's not always, it's sometimes triggered by a specific application or issue, but it's not in response to it. I think that's important. And so to that, because the EFU, I know there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of effort on the part of Lane County. I know Commissioner Sennig and I in particular both have advocated for the sort of agritourism exception to be able to use farm to cafe bill allowable activities. So that word compatible is a really important word in that bullet to me. Who determines what is compatible with agricultural activities in the case of use of zoning for EFU?
Well, there are some specific uses that are listed in ORS 215. So I think that's what I was meaning in this bullet, is there are very specific uses that are allowed outright, and then some that trigger maybe a type 2 review. But you're right, that's a very that word can be taken a lot of different ways.
Right. Sort of open to interpretation, but what I'm hearing you say is often you all are not actually interpreting, you are referencing then. There is another set of standards that the state has outlined about how you define that word.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Great question, thank you for clarifying that. So marginal land, so the farm and forest zones are resource lands, and marginal lands are also resource lands. They are a subset. They're lands that are, as the name states, marginally productive due to low soil productivity and capability, that are not considered productive resource lands. So some of the activities, we look to, similar uses that are allowed in the farm zone. And that's because the state statute points directly to tell us these uses are allowed in the marginal land zone that are also allowed in the farm and forest zones. Typically, dwelling is an outright permitted use, except that there's a area requirement. So you can have one dwelling per 1 dwelling per 20 acres, if the property is adjacent to farm or forest zoned land, or 1 dwelling per 10 acres if they are adjacent to non-resource or developed and committed land. Like rural residential or rural commercial. If a property has less than that acreage, then the dwelling is not allowed. That's how the code and state law is written, with the exception of replacement dwellings. The legislature authorized marginal land designations, and it was codified into ORS 197 in 1983. So that's when that tool was added to state law. Only Lane County and Washington County have adopted marginal lands. And then later in 1993, the state repealed that section of the code. That said, the state has allowed Lane County, Washington County to continue with those plan designations and the uses. And property owners in our county still have the opportunity to request, if they feel they meet the certain criteria, that they can change their property from resource zoning to marginal lands. But we look back, it has us look back to a 1991 version of that ORS 197. And then in 1997, the board issued a directive on clarifying and interpreting the process of how to go through the criteria that was set in ORS 97. There was a lot of ambiguity of how to interpret the words and what this and that meant. And so that document is very helpful when we're processing those applications, or even just sharing that document with property owners so that they're educated to know if they qualify for that or not. The 2-part test talks about, there's an income test, and then there's a parcelization test. And they're both very much tied to 1983. So we're not looking at today's income, and we're not looking at today's or lack of income, or the parcelization around the property now. We're looking back around the 1983 timeframe. I can answer questions on that now if you want, or I can move forward. Okay.
Just a note that Lane County and Washington County back then were almost the same size in population.
Oh, were they?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay, really quickly, gonna go through rural residential zoning as where, as long as we have regardless of if the property meets the minimum lot size or not, if it's determined that it's an lawfully established unit of land, it should and has enough area to qualify for a septic system and has adequate access to water, then they can qualify for a single family dwelling. We also recently added criteria: if the property is over 2 acres, they can have an ADU, so that's great news. And another little note is, in unincorporated communities, if a property meets the minimum lot size of the zoning, they can qualify for a duplex. It doesn't come up very often, but it's good to note that we do have that as an option. Rural commercial, there's not a minimum lot size. It's really tries to promote, rural commercial uses in this area. State law has, depending on if you're in the rural area, unincorporated community, a rural unincorporated community, or an urban unincorporated community, which we have one of, it allows a maximum square footage for the use. That's set by state law, and same with the rural industrial zone. They have larger square footages because industrial uses tend to take up more space. And move on to kind of what our checklist is and what we hope to set. What somebody would expect coming into our planner on duty desk. So I'll try to go through this. We set this up to share with the public on our Holiday Farm Fire website, a lot of this information. So kind of why do a planning check? Planning check helps the applicant to know what uses are allowed on the property and where those uses are best sited. We complete a planning check to make sure that the use fits within the land use codes, and to ensure that certain environmental factors like riparian health or the potential for flooding are addressed. The planner on duty will look at the parcel zoning, various environmental features, access for residents and for emergency responders. And we'll also see if the project will impact any other state agencies. Once the planning check is complete, planners will advise on next steps. If the project is an outright allowed use in the proposed location, the planner will sign off on the project, both on the site plan typically and in our software, and advise the applicant to talk with our builder on duty if it requires building permits or septic permits. Sometimes the project will need additional applications before we can approve planning. In that case, we'll go over those applications and timelines and fees for those projects. What is the project? When an applicant meets with the planner on duty, the planner first needs to know about the project itself. Is it a dwelling? Will it be a shop, a garage, storage space? Is it a place of business or a house? Some uses are allowed outright in certain codes and on certain properties, and others may need a type 1 application or a type 2 or a combination of both. Knowing where the building is going to go on the property is also very important. Knowing if there's setback issues, if it's an existing building, is there past permit history, things like that. Is it going to be in the floodplain? Is an area outside of the floodplain or outside of the riparian setback? That might be a faster way to get to your building permit process. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. So we try to work through those options with property owners. And we went over what the base zones are, but really we're trying to make sure that the use that they're asking for is the use that they're meaning. So we try to really find out, what are you going to use the building for? If they're a building, what's going to happen with the structure? So that's, we really, well, a lot of times we'll pull up the zoning on the screen with the customer if they're in the person in office, or we're talking to them over the phone, we'll direct them how to access that information or handouts on our website. So we're gonna look at the overlay zones, and if they are, I've mentioned floodplain riparian, there's also wetlands. The state regulates wetlands, so we would usually provide contact information to the Department of State Lands to determine if they need any permits for those, for development in those areas. And Amber covered some of our coastal overlay regulations with our hazards checklists. So we want to make sure has review been done in the past, and we'll look at those to determine if a new review is needed or if we can rely on those past reviews, if there's hazards or not on the property. And if there's a conflict, say it's an outright permitted use in the rural residential zone, but it's in the riparian setback area. Yes, it's an outright permitted use in the zone, but we still would trigger a type 2 riparian modification to comply with those riparian standards. So sometimes there's what may appear to be conflicting, regulations between the zones, but we have to always look at, triggering the most, the highest review when looking at all the zones together.
Commissioner Sonic had a question.
Yeah. Who sets the riparian zones? Where does that overlay come from?
Yeah, so that's part of our goal 5 inventory. It's goal 5, right? Yeah. Just double checking. Pretty sure. So the rivers and the class 1 stream layer was adopted into the comprehensive plan. And then based on zoning, depending on what zone, you either have a 50 or 100-foot setback from what's called the ordinary high water.
Okay.
But you said who adopted?
I did say who.
So the board,
The
I
Board of
guess, through
Commissioners.
the adoption of the comprehensive plan.
And
and
thereby the board can change it.
To be specific, you're talking about the Board of Commissioners, the Lane County Board, not the state board or anybody else.
Yes, I mean, I think we would partner with Department of Fish and Wildlife to determine what are class 1 streams. And we would have to go through a plan amendment to change our policies and to change our inventory of class 1 streams if that was to happen.
Is that the same selection criteria for overlays? I mean, for, like I said, a big game overlay or an airport safety zone overlay or something, who decides that? Is that the board ultimately can either decide on changing or adopting that, or is that a state application?
It'd have to comply with statewide planning goals, but it would be amended or adopted through an ordinance by the board.
So if you're saying statewide planning goals, that means that again, to Chair's point, there's some interpretation to happen there. It's not an absolute. Am I correct?
Yeah, specific to riparian areas, like Lindsay mentioned, we would coordinate with state agencies. The data, I presume, would be provided by the state, like Department of State Lands, or WFW. And then we would take a look at that. And there's, I believe if we were to be amending, say, the riparian area setback today, that would trigger the need to comply with the current Oregon administrative rules. Our previous or our current adopted maps are under the version that was adopted, the Oregon administrative rules before 1996. If we were to go through today's process, then that would go through Division 23, and there's pretty prescriptive rules that we'd be happy to discuss with the board at a future work session regarding what exactly that would entail. I don't think we have a copy of it on us, but there's and I don't have it committed to memory, but we haven't gone through that process yet. But there's fairly prescriptive rules, and I believe that data would come from state agencies, but then ultimately the board would review that and adopt that. That would go to the board.
Question.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I think maybe just as a pencil mark to maybe on a future work session, I'd certainly like to know, because I'm trying to speak through the weeds here. We're getting a lot of emails about F2 properties and people discovering that the property they bought generations ago are now not qualified for X, Y, and Z. So I think what would help me going forward would be just some, in light of the questions we just asked, what some prescriptive things are thought of as immovable law that are actually things the board could change, given the fact if they knew the information, knew the people petitioning Land Management Division for a hearing or ears, I would like to know that kind of information, just so we can see that if things are being applied the way they should be in the current times. Obviously, things have changed since 1983 and 1996. So I think I would like some more specifics on what we're seeing as a pattern in land management, of what the board could maybe listen in on and maybe have some opinion on, a little stronger opinion than they've had in the past.
Thanks, Sharon. We'd be happy to follow up on that.
Yeah.
And I think if I would just say anything like that being brought forward, because it's never as straightforward as and the state can do this or the board can do that. So what is that process?
Right.
So it might ultimately be that it's a decision made by the Board of County Commissioners, but there are layers of process and hours of staff time and what that takes. And when you do something like change a rural comprehensive plan, there are domino effects or ripple effects from any one change that affects more than any one amendment or potential. Great. This is why I always like to refer those folks on to our professional staff who know all the ins and outs and help people understand why they're getting the ruling they're getting. Thank you.
So we have a slide about site plans. This is one of our most important documents that we utilize in land management and in planning. Having a clear site plan is key to understanding what's going on the property, are there any hazards, are there any steep slopes or rivers or creeks or wetlands? What are the setbacks, where are existing buildings, where are new buildings maybe gonna go? Where is the driveway? Where is it existing, or is that our proposed driveway? There's chapter 15 has, if it's going on a county road, there's driveway spacing standards for safety, things like that. So our site plan is one of our most crucial documents that we see.
Commissioner Farr.
And as we look at things, I wonder how other counties are. So can we presume that all 36 counties require a site plan?
I would hope so.
But
I
we
wouldn't
know we
presume.
do, but we don't know
I
if Douglas
wouldn't
County
presume
does.
that, But I would hope so. I don't.
I know the answers. Okay.
Is there a help that the county provides for someone who doesn't have a site plan? I've had a number of requests of people saying, I
Yeah,
don't know what they're talking about, and then they go try to find professional help, and they're like, why does the county need it? So I'm kind of wondering if this, in follow-up to Commissioner Park's question, is if we're unique in the fact that we always require a site plan.
no, I'm thinking most places require site plans.
Anything I build, I've got to put a site plan together. I mean, I know the answer to that.
Yeah, so many property owners draw their own site plans. We are always happy to print out 11 and a half or 11 by 17 air photos that people can trace. We really try to discourage people using air photos as site plans because they don't scan well. And for long-term, say looking back from 5 or 10 years from now, it's just, they're really hard to kind of review. But we're happy to print out air photos that are to scale that people then can, and then provide another piece of paper that's blank and then they can trace over it. A lot of times, we have actually printed out copies of scaled rulers. The scale, we don't have the actual, if they're in our lobby, we'll let them borrow the scaled rulers, but a lot of times we'll have copies that people can cut along the line or fold and they can, and we just ask that they do their best. A lot is making sure all the structures and infrastructure are shown on there to the best of their knowledge. And sometimes that's hard because sometimes we don't have the past permit history to kind of show where that's at. So we try to print old site plans to help show where those maybe their septic system or well or things are at. A lot of those older site plans from the 60s, 70s, 80s aren't necessarily to scale. So we say use this as a reference as best as you can to then put it on a scaled document. But a lot of people will fill them out in our lobby or tape them up to our window, and we try to encourage that.
So you're not looking necessarily for a professionally drawn, expensive, you're looking for something
No.
that really helps your planners make sure what they're putting on the property is allowable. You're trying to help people get their project done.
Yes, and that they're meeting setbacks and things like that. So that's why the scale is really important, so that we can approve it in the location, and when the building inspector goes out, he or she knows that they're in the right location that was approved.
Great. Did you have a question, Commissioner?
Yeah.
Snyder?
So I do get questions about the site plans and as we all know, in construction project, things come up and things have to get moved. How much room for variance are you guys allowed to adjust the original site plan? If somebody came to you and said, well, the house is gonna be this many square feet, it's gonna be here. Oops, we got a hold of the plans and we added an extra bedroom or something. And I mean, it's still obviously if you were running into setbacks and those kind of things, that would be an issue. But if you weren't running into those, is the square footage of a house able to change a certain percentage or how, or
So usually if they're doing it mid-construction, like mid-permit, and they're doing a change to their building permit, that happens all the time. So that's fine. We usually just have them resubmit a site plan with their modified building plans. And then we'll re-sign off on that at that point.
okay.
If it's mid-process.
Yep. Excellent.
Mhm. So what other applications are needed before the project has final land use approval? So a lot of times somebody will get a special use permit for whether it's a house or commercial project, something like that, and they're almost there, but there are some conditions of approval that need to be satisfied before they can go forward and submit their building permits, or maybe they're able to submit their building permits, but they're not able to get them issued until they meet certain conditions. So a lot of times the planner on duty will look over the site plan. They know about the zoning and the overlays, they know about the previous land use approvals, they'll print out a copy of the conditions of approval, they're able to sign off on the site plan. But they might need a fuel break verification. If it's in the forest zone, we do a lot of verification of conditions where we're looking, there's covenants that need to be recorded for the code. So we're looking for that to be recorded. We'll go out to the property and physically review the driveway to make sure it meets the fire siting standards code. We'll review fuel break standards. A lot of times we'll ask that the home site is staked out so that we can review that. We'll go out there a couple times, so we don't always expect that the first time we go out to a property that it's fully met code. A lot of times, especially with trees and clearing of trees, people aren't sure. They want to retain as many as they can, which I completely understand. So we'll go out, do an initial look and say, okay, clear out some of that brush over there to limb up so that there's a reduction from a ground fire to spread up into the crown. And then I'll come back and then we can move forward type things. And then sometimes if we're ready to move forward with the building permit, but there's let's see, there's wetlands or there are historic preservation overlay or an archaeological overlay on our zoning map, we'll need to provide notice to one of the state agencies. So what happens there is we take the building permit in, there's a planning hold for 30 days, and that's straight out of state statute that we have to put it on hold for 30 days. And then we move forward, and the state agency usually contacts the property owner directly. They don't tell us to hold the permit up. It's the property owner's responsibility to work with that agency if something needs to be done prior to the start of construction or not. They send us a courtesy copy as well, so we try to work with them if they have questions. I think that's it for the planner on duty counter. So we're gonna move along. I'm gonna talk about upcoming projects. So I've been working with one of our senior planners and with staff from Lane Council of Governments and DLCD staff on the Blue River Complete Community Plan update, which is really exciting. We're getting really close to having an adoption package ready. So we've been working for over a year with community members. We have a project advisory committee made up of community members and state agency members. And I've had a number of online virtual workshops and in person up at the high school, community meetings, getting feedback. And we have a complete community plan. And including in that adoption package is going to be 3 new zones besides the plan document itself, which will be adopted into the comprehensive plan. We'll have 3 new zones that we're adopting into chapter 16 of Lane Code. We're going to be amending some of the policies in the comprehensive plan to support the changes that the zoning is bringing on, reducing densities, things like that. We're going to be doing planning and zoning map amendments because all of the community of Blue River, minus the school property and the park or the track property, is getting rezoned to new zones, either a residential zone or a community flex zone, which will be residential and commercial flexibility. And then findings to support the changes. And the goal of the project is to reduce barriers to development. Some of them are to reduce setbacks, get rid of parking requirements and standards, and trying to lessen review processes for new projects, like rural commercial property typically would require a type 2 application review, and we're hoping that we can have it go down to a type 1 and have clear and objective standards for those projects. So where we're at in that project is we're really hoping to get to the Planning Commission in July for a work session and for a public hearing before the Planning Commission in August. And then once they make a formal recommendation, we'll bring it to you for review as well. So it's been a long time coming, but we're excited with the progress that's being made. And then I'm going to hand it over to Amber to discuss the other upcoming projects.
Yeah, so we're excited to be working on drafting code updates for, we call it the Legislative and Housekeeping Code Updates Project. So we're going to, from here forward, try to bring that before the board on a regular basis, where we're keeping the code consistent with any state law that has been enrolled in the past couple of years. And then also, you know, sometimes we become aware if there's a typo or a procedure or a code that the hearings official or other case law clarifies needs some cleanup work, minor housekeeping code update work, that will be folded into the project. So we're working on drafting code, and we'll be taking that to the Planning Commission for work session. We're hoping this summer. I did want to talk about one of the bills here in a second that we're looking at as part of that project. But before I get to that point, we're also continuing work on implementing House Bill 3197. So that is the bill that has a requirement for clear and objective standards for housing on rural residentially zoned lands, what are called non-resource lands, lands that have been determined not to qualify as farmlands or agricultural lands, and unincorporated communities that were adopted after 1984. So we're working, that's sort of our next phase of our code modernization project. And the goals with our code modernization project were to streamline the code and make it more user-friendly. So it dovetails really nicely with that. So we envision that as our next phase of code modernization. There are requirements that we move forward with that project by next year. So we're working to move ahead as quickly as possible on that. There's a board assignment for scope goal 5 policy 11 big game. I did want to highlight, because it's been about a year, that assignment is still on our work plan. And because there is an active quasi judicial application related to that, we haven't returned to the board yet with that. But I'm hearing that there's maybe some interest in diving into, in a future topic, what the processes are, how the county goes about adopting maps and standards for various areas of state law. So if that's of the board's interest, we'd be happy to touch on that topic in a work session as well. And then,
Excuse me, just
Excuse
a
me,
minute.
Amber, just-
Vice Chair has a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt that. So are you thinking that that big goal, the goal 5 policy 11 is gonna come to us after we're done with the land thing that we're looking at now, or what's our timeline on that, I guess I'm asking?
so and we're really looking to the board on this. Of course, it is a board assignment, so we're happy to follow the board's direction. The way we're understanding it is that they are very related, and the board may want to know the outcome of that land application matter to weigh into that discussion about scoping and possible directions.
And I think I would look to our Office of County Counsel as well. Tiffany Johnson's in the room. I think I saw Council Pettigrew log on online, so I don't know if either wants to make any comment about fulfilling that board assignment and the timing as it relates to the open application in question. Council Pettigrew, are you with us? Did you want to comment on that, or otherwise Ms. Johnson's coming to the table as well? We've minimized the little tile that lets us see who's online, so we're at a little disadvantage.
Thank you, Chair. Because we are in active litigation with one of those parties, I would decline to provide legal advice in this forum at this time. But I'm happy to provide client privileged advice and counsel on this question of timing by separate cover.
Okay, thank you for that. Vice Chair has a question or comment?
Yeah, just some clarification. I guess I'm like, maybe the question was misinterpreted. I'm not asking for us to have legal advice. I guess the thing that would help me, maybe I'm thinking of going forward with handling that decision, would be more knowledge and education about goal 5 and policy 11. I think that was kind of the thrust of the assignment.
Well, if the objective is to just obtain information and general context for goal 5, I think that would be appropriate at any time, provided that staff can prepare that in a manner that meets the board's goals.
Thank you.
So if that's of the board's interest, we'd be happy to plan a continued work session, and that could focus on the general information around goal 5 and how to update goal 5 plans and codes.
Yeah, maybe if I could, as a request, maybe just ask the Office of County Counsel to go back and review the wording of the assignment. Might help us understand whether there's something that could come to us in a public session, or whether there's a memo, a privilege memo that needs to go out just to follow up on what Vice Chair is requesting. That might be helpful, because that was a while ago.
Happy to do that. Good idea. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
We are also working on a metro plan amendment for a sewer line extension to go the Goshen unincorporated community and Short Mountain landfill for the transport of leachate. So those are two specific areas. I mentioned the goal exceptions earlier. Those are two very specific exception allowances in the Oregon OARs for public facilities. And so, and there is a metro plan policy that prohibits currently extension outside of UDV. So we're working on a metro plan amendment, coordinating with our city partners on that. And that has gone to the planning commission. It will need to go back to the planning commission to address some public comments that were received, but we're moving forward with that. And then Lindsay has already talked about the Blue River Community Plan. I wanted to highlight Senate Bill 1013 as part of that we're looking at as part of our legislative updates, and we're requesting the board's direction on whether it'd be helpful to have a further work session on that bill. It is on our work plan for our legislative and housekeeping updates. We have had a project kickoff on this bill specifically. And so just to kind of go over what that bill is, so it says that county may, that's kind of a specific meaning of that word in statute that we understand means it requires adoption by the board. It's not just an outright permitted use that we can apply out of state law right now. So it says the county may allow an owner of a lot or parcel in a rural area to site on the property one recreational vehicle that's used for residential purposes and is subject to a residential rental agreement, subject to standards. It's not in urban reserves. The single family dwelling, there is a single family dwelling occupied as a primary residence on the property. No other dwelling units or portion of a single family dwelling unit rented as a residential or is rented as a residential tenancy can't be used for short-term uses. Essential services are provided. The RV is owned or leased by a tenant. And then there's, it says the county may require registration, written residential agreement, payment limitations, and or reasonable appearance repairs or inspections. So again, we're working on drafting a code. Would like direction from the board on whether it'd be helpful to have a work session, our current, and some feedback on our current work plan, which is to draft code and take that to our planning commission. But we'd be happy to bring that to the board for discussion on policy options.
Great.
And that's really the conclusion. We're happy to take other questions and any other requests for further work sessions.
Great, thank you so much to the board. Commissioner Sunning.
Yeah, so with this SB 1013, so in what instances could you have an RV but not an ADU? Because I don't see any parcel sizes or anything in this for this particular legislative action. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great question.
And I mean, we could cover that in the work session. I was just curious thinking about it, like what are the benefits and, you know, pros and cons of an RV versus an ADU on something like that. But
the bill does say that there's no other dwelling units on the property or no portion of a single family dwelling that's rented as residential tenancy. So that might be something we needed to take a look at, whether accessory dwelling unit, whether that term in the bill, other dwelling unit, is also inclusive of accessory dwelling units. I think we would need to take a look at that. But you're correct. I'm not seeing that there's any specific property size like with the ADU bill.
thank you. That'd be helpful.
Not seeing anything else from the board. Oh, Commissioner.
So you're asking if we have any requests for future work sessions?
Yes.
On this short notice? Okay. I think questions that come up fairly frequently compare us to other counties and compare us to other jurisdictions. And I would like to be able to reassure people that we are not being more restrictive in allowing the development of new housing than other counties with similar regulations that they need to adhere to. Now, you mentioned that Lane County is unique, and not unique, but that we are all 19 goals apply in Lane County. They don't apply in all counties. So we do certainly have some overlapping and conflicting regulations potentially that can slow down the building process or find a way to say no instead of yes to building a house. And for me, it's important that we're able to reassure people that we are doing the best we can, that we are operating as quickly as we possibly can, and if it is allowable in state rules, and the rules that apply to us, we are allowing it. I would like to be able to reassure people across the board unequivocally that those are the conditions. So, and I don't know how we weave that into a work session, quite frankly, you know, and I asked you the question about ORS versus OAR. Well, statutes are the codified laws of the state, ORS. OAR they have the weight of law, but they're not codified. They're administrative rules that are subject to change by the administration that wrote them. They can do it today, tomorrow, and they can do it, I'm not going to say on a whim, but should they choose to do it on a whim, they can. Statutes are different. So when our rules are relevant or are related to an OAR as opposed to an ORS, unless the OAR is specifically citing an ORS, then the OAR is something that can be addressed without going through a legislative process. It's quasi-legislative. It's not fully legislative. And the authority has been designated to the agencies by the legislature. But that being said, it's people who aren't elected officials, who aren't the general public in a vote. It's people sitting in an office making the regulations. And so that's, you know, a part of the discussion that we have is, are we interpreting an OAR in a different way that other counties interpret it, where they can find, yes, can you build this house? Yes. And we say no, even though it's the same rules, the same regulations, and the same administrative process. So, and I don't know exactly how we get to that, but my ultimate goal is to be able to say, yes, we are doing the best we can. I guarantee it. You can go to sleep on that, and I promise you that we are. I want to be able to promise people that we're doing the best that we can. So now that seems pretty vague, doesn't it? However, there's a fine line there. You know, if I've been told by planning staff in the past, long past, that we couldn't do something when we jolly well could. And I was called out on it in public, and it was pretty embarrassing. So.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'd be happy to plan a work session around that topic as well.
Thank you, because making certain that the public has the same kind of confidence that we have in your work is very, very important. And it also eliminates questions that are vague questions or questions based on an incomplete set of the understanding of the process that we are subject to.
All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioners. We really appreciate the time today, and we'll work on planning some work sessions.
Okay.
Both presentations are fantastic. Thank you. Very.
Yeah, it's always helpful to get the information, just to get the information and not as it relates to a decision in front of us. That's why these work sessions are so valuable. Thank you. I could ask you if we take the presentation down, then we can see if there's anyone else joining us on screen, although I don't think for the rest of our public session items there needs to be. We just have commissioner's business left before us, and then we have a 3 p.m. time certain executive session. So with that, I will move us to commissioner announcements. Are there any announcements from the board? Seeing none. Future board assignment requests. Do we have any? Commissioner Seneca.
It's more of a clarifying request, I would say. I've been working with Mr. Thiel about the Herring and Long letter, and he has assured me that with some work, he can get it on the June 25th public hearing, and I would like to see it there. I would like to see staff draft the Herring and Long letter and have it be in the agenda for the public hearing on June 25th.
And I see Mr. Thiel, oh, I thought he had, yes, he has joined us online if we have questions. So you're asking, well, first of all, can we get some clarity? And this may be a Judy question who's looking at, can pull up future agenda assignments. Is the hearing currently scheduled for the 25th or the 26th?
Chair, the hearing is scheduled for the 26th. It's Wednesday at 9 a.m. We are just too full on that Tuesday.
Thank you. And so, Commissioner, you're asking to include the recommendations that came to us essentially through public comment to be considered in a public hearing as a as an item rather than having that be part of the public comment at the hearing.
Yes, be at the public hearing as a charter, possible public hearing on the charter amendment as the letter is written. Or public comment.
Can you restate that? Sorry, I didn't quite follow.
I would like to have staff to draft the hearing and long letter for the June 26th meeting to be in the agenda for public input.
Maybe Commissioner Buck is maybe going to get at, I'm still a little confused about what that assignment actually is, but Commissioner Buck, go ahead.
That sounds identical to the request at the last meeting. But, you know, we're limited to what we can say here because we have heard from our county counsel through attorney-client privilege. So it's hard to necessarily discuss this again without attempting to waive attorney-client privilege.
Well, this clarity is coming from advice from our county counsel.
But I haven't received anything.
So I'm going to ask first just a timing and process question. Is this public hearing considered as other public hearings to require a certain number of advanced days of public notice? We set the date in a public meeting for a public hearing. And it's my understanding those often require, I think it's a 21-day. So my first question, just regardless of the content and what we're discussing, are we beholden to any kind of advanced timeline and notice to the public for a public hearing and the contents of what's presented there?
And Chair, this is Steve Thiel, and I apologize, I'm having video issues, but I am here present via audio. Chair, is that question directed towards me?
Yes, please, or county counsel, whoever, but for a legal question.
Ms. Pettigrew, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding, the notification requirements ultimately are no, the particular language is escaping me, but providing reasonable notice ultimately. So my understanding is that if we get it to Tanya or whoever's, Judy, whoever's covering for Tanya this week, by tomorrow, that posting subsequent to that would be sufficient. But again, Ms. Pettigrew, if you think I've been correct on that, please chime in.
We have poor audio from both of you, but I think what I hear you saying, Mr. Thiel, is that it's not like with an ordinance where we set a public hearing and open a record and so on. And so the timeliness is about when staff can prepare the materials and you can meet the timeline that you need to do that?
That's my understanding, Chair. We're talking about an order as opposed to an ordinance.
Got it. And I guess my question for Commissioner Senega is why this individual would be welcome to come to the already established public hearing and present an alternative idea for consideration, as opposed to us on behalf of an individual elevating something on a parity with something that has been a 2 years long vetted process. That's what I'm wrestling with, is anyone could show up that we don't even know who yet and give public comment at that meeting and say, I have some other ideas for your consideration. So I'm wondering about why the insistence of elevating what is essentially public comment, a letter received, to that level instead of letting it stand as public comment, which can become part of the record at an existing hearing in an existing approved and vetted process.
I think because it's going to the public hearing, I would like this particular item brought to the public hearing. The reason I'm being insistent in bringing it up again is because there was a misunderstanding at last week's meeting. So I was asked if I could clarify that at this week's meeting. So this isn't an insistence, this is a clarification of what I was asking for.
Well, I have the same question. It's the same question though. And I see Commissioner Farr wants to speak, but.
Thank you. I'd like to look at the timeline on the entire process. So the ultimate goal is to have something on the November ballot regarding charter review recommendations. That's the ultimate, let's say that is the ultimate goal. So let's step backwards from there. And when do we receive input? One source that we'll receive input from is a charter review committee. Now, we are a public agency, and the rest of the public, all of the public is welcome to providing input into recommendations for charter review. In fact, they can initiate it themselves. So, the point I'd like to make is that the June 26th meeting is the next step in a number of steps before the middle of August, which is when we have to decide if we're going to put something on the ballot or not. So we actually have, from this moment, about 2 months before we have to decide if something's going to be on the ballot. So the sooner we can begin to consider the recommendations from the public, whomever it may be, whether it be from Harang Long or whether it may be from pick an agency, the sooner we can begin to consider that, then the easier it is, the more efficient and the more judicious it's going to be for us to make a decision. Because ultimately, we make the decision what will go on the ballot, if anything goes on the ballot in November. So I would agree with Commissioner Senega's request in that it's a document that we can put forward as an alternative, not an alternative, but just as another consideration as the public listens and provides public input before the middle of August. Between now and the middle of August, there's no July 9th magic date. There's no July 16th magic date. The only deadline is the middle of August, which is when we have to decide. We have to notify that we are going to be putting something on the ballot. So we have plenty of time to look at the different options, and this is one of the options.
Yeah. So sorry.
That's not an argument. I'm not arguing here, and I'm not particularly inviting debate on this.
Yeah.
I'm making a point.
Thank you for that clarification. I understand that, and you started out with an assumption, which is that our end goal is the November 5th ballot, and that isn't something that we've even. I did revise that. I said, let's presume that.
Right.
So. And I think, again, my hesitation here and being mindful, as Commissioner Buck mentioned, is an attorney-client privileged memo with an assessment, as was part of the assignment and agreed to as a request for assessment from our Office of Legal Counsel. The difference here is we are asking to dedicate staff time from a highly professional office that is very busy to do work on what is essentially a piece of public comment. And that's not something we generally do, where people just send us an email and then we hand it over to staff and ask them to do work on it. That, to me, that is a difference than had this letter come through and been treated as the public comment that it is. It's being managed as work that was not, as far as I'm understanding or aware, board-directed work. It's committing staff resource to something that was not board-directed work.
Then may I ask Commissioner Senega a question? Your intent is for the public to be able to provide comment on this document.
That's what I'm asking for, yes.
So that's the intent. And in that it is is a document that's been placed before us. It doesn't seem unreasonable that the public should be able to provide comment on that particular document and any other document that people put forward to us. And I'm wondering why there's a resistance to letting the public comment on a document that has been submitted to us. I'm wondering why there's a reluctance there.
Well, I think I want to call on Commissioner Buck, but that's Commissioner Buck.
Okay. I think we're going to get ourselves in some serious legal hot water proceeding with this particular method. And of course, we can't talk about everything at this work session. The issue being presented is this person could submit this as public comment in the public hearing process. That would be the normal procedure. And all people can read those materials. So if anybody wants to submit something through the public hearing process, they can do that. That would be the correct way for this person to submit this information. we can deliberate about it after the fact and after public input. You know, the whole process of trying to bring somebody's public comment and insert it into a public hearing, I have never experienced since I've been here in my 6 years. Maybe you haven't, you've been here longer, but this is not the normal procedure, and it's not transparent, and it's not a very democratic way for people to come and approach the board in a way in which would be placed on a public charter amendment, potentially in a November election. If they want to submit it during the public hearing process, they should do so. But for us to elevate it to a point where it's as if we, the board, is presenting this to the public for comment, I think is gonna be highly problematic from a legal perspective.
So I see Commissioner Farr wants to comment, and I'm just checking, we have just a few minutes before our executive session, which is all internal partners. Judy Williams and I spoke before this that if we need a few extra minutes, we can probably go a little past 3, but not by much because we'll have staff. So Judy, are you listening in?
Yes, I am.
So if you're able to just alert folks, maybe just a 5-minute grace period on the start of exec session, and then we'll try to wrap this. And then what I'm trying to do is avoid having to come back out into public session after exec to complete this conversation, trying to conclude our business as best we can. Thank you.
Perfect. And just to throw out one other option if needed, tomorrow after the students' presentation is another opportunity to further if you need more than 5 minutes.
Oh, great. Thank you for that. So we could carry forward the business into tomorrow morning session if we can't wrap it up today. Great. Thank you. Commissioner Seneca and Commissioner Farr.
Oh, I didn't have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm, this is part of the process. And I mean, I guess we're looking at it as 2 different processes. This is part of the process. We can elevate this. This is what a commissioner can elevate a charter amendment if they like what they see. This is completely in the process. So I guess we kind of disagree on that.
Commissioner Farr.
I guess I'd like to suggest that this has already been submitted as public comment. The public comment period has no front end. We have a public public hearing on the 26th in which anybody can submit anything in writing or orally beginning now. And the intent of having this elevated to the point where people can see that it has been submitted and that they can thereby have an opportunity to comment on it. That's something that I'm interested in. I've looked at it, and you know, I'm not going to comment on the validity of it. I'm not going to comment on the reason for it, or who wrote it. I don't care who wrote it. I think if they submit it, then we should give people an opportunity to provide comment on it. And that's the process that I'm looking for right now, is when we have the public hearing on June 26th, that people can comment on this particular document. And I don't see that as being, gosh, undemocratic. No, I don't see it as undemocratic. And I'm not understanding why there's a attorney-client privilege in a publicly submitted document that we're just asking, can this be a part of the public hearing on the 26th? So I just I guess I'm looking for the way to yes on this. How do we make this a part of the public hearing on the 26th? If Commissioner Seneca is the procedure that he's recommended is somehow falling afoul of a democratic process, whatever that may be, then how can we make this a part of the discussion that we have on June 26th, which is only the next step between now and the middle of August?
Well, I think for the clarity of the public's sake, because everyone around this table understands, the attorney-client privilege is the analysis that was requested as part of the assignment. And the difference is we are asking staff time be spent to craft something that puts this recommendation on parity with other recommendations from a committee, a long-standing committee that has had a lot of staff support, including from legal and our county clerk. And that is very different. And not something we've ever afforded any other individual or group that, as Commissioner Buck mentioned, we're aware of. If we want it to be, if it's public comment, it can get uploaded like everything else, and then that's published as part of the agenda item as public comment that came in for that meeting. And that satisfies what you're asking, Commissioner Farr, which is that it's available to the public to review and then comment on. That's what we do every week, is we take public comment and it gets uploaded if it's received in time and becomes part of the board packet. So that is achievable through a process that we do every week.
I would love to think that we're all trying to say the same thing. Then can we, looking at the time, can we just delay the balance of this conversation to the end of the meeting tomorrow?
I'm fine with that. And perhaps, Mr. Thiel, are you available to be sort of on standby tomorrow morning if we have any questions? Because it might be helpful to hear what fulfilling this assignment actually requires of your office and would produce for us, different than this being uploaded as a public comment and available for consideration.
Yes, Chair, I am available, of course. And again, as a reminder, I haven't looked at the board's agenda or schedule for tomorrow. But if ultimately, if the board decides that this proposal or these proposals should be converted to essentially the type of board materials that we've prepared for the Charter Review Committee proposals, then the deadline to provide that to Judy this week will be, I believe, noon.
I do know, I mean, I understand that puts up even more of a constraint, so thank you. And if we arrive at something, maybe we have in the past had things where a packet says, staff's working on this item if we need to buy a few more hours. So let's suspend the conversation.
I have one quick request for Stephen. Mr. Thiel, can you also provide a memo to me why this requires attorney-client privilege? So, I understand it was in a memo from our legal staff, and quite often memos do cite confidentiality. And I wonder why there's attorney-client privilege on this particular memo.
Well, Commissioner, the privilege is the board's privilege. It's not for me to waive the board's privilege. The advice that the board receives from legal counsel ultimately is intended to guide and protect the board from a legal standpoint, and it's ultimately up to the board to determine if they ever want to waive that privilege. But if there's specific information, Commissioner, that you'd like in regard to privilege on a specific topic or in general, I'm happy to provide that.
Now, I think your last definition is fine. So if I receive a comment if I ask county council, do I need to declare a conflict of interest on this particular item? And they give me a response, there's attorney-client privilege involved in that, but I have to provide that out loud. So at that point, I'm waiving the attorney. So what you're saying is anytime you say anything to us as attorney-client privilege, and we can or cannot, we may or may not discuss what you say to us unless it's governed by a statute of some kind.
Well, Commissioner, I guess I hesitate to go as far as to say every time we discuss anything with you folks. But in this specific case, we're dealing with legal analysis.
And if I could add to that, quickly just covered by the box.
County counsel, we don't have clear audio on you.
My question's been satisfied. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
So, if I may, your question and your concerns are with putting this in the agenda for the public hearing?
I think we're gonna suspend this and take it up tomorrow. I'm concerned that a response will generate more response and so on. And I see staff gathering and I want to honor we asked for 5 additional minutes and we're at that time. And we do have other members of our staff waiting for the executive session item. So I will read us in. Seems I can pull that up. And I can ask if it is the will of the board to take this up after the exec session today. But I know Judy had some challenges with the mechanics of that, of going back into a public session. So I think the solution of tomorrow morning is probably the most straightforward. Okay, great, thank you. Then I will read us in. Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602D, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are precluded from attending. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. Members of the news media are not allowed to tape, video record, or otherwise record an executive session. Verbatim notes are prohibited. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back into public session should the need arise. Pending who logs on.